This episode is brought to you by Granola, Brevo, Shopify, and Fabric by Gerber Life. If you're in back-to-back meetings and want to stay focused while getting clear, structured notes, try Granola. You can try it totally free for 3 months. Just head to granola.ai/Kwame. That's granola.ai/Kwame to get your time back. If you're looking to level up your marketing, check out Brevo. Get started today or use code ANYTHING50 to save 50% on starter and standard plans for the first 3 months of an annual subscription. Just head to www.brevo.com/anything to take your marketing further with Brevo and Aura. Ready to launch or grow your business? Start with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/Kwame. And finally, if you are a parent thinking about protecting your family's financial future, check out Fabric by Gerber Life. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/Kwame. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Today's show is sponsored by strawberry.me. Let me ask you something. Are you truly where you want to be in your career? Or are you waking up every day knowing that you're capable of more, but you're just not sure how to bridge that gap? Most successful people that I know, the ones that lead at the highest levels, don't figure it out in a vacuum. They have mentors and coaches guiding them. I've always said that the most important negotiation you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. And for me, one of the toughest self-negotiations that I had to have was unlearning the belief that I could do it all by myself. Early on in my journey, I thought that I had to have all the answers, but I quickly realized that the fastest way to hit a ceiling is to work in isolation. It wasn't until I sought out mentors and professional coaching that I actually learned how to articulate my value and navigate the high-stakes pivots that got me where I am today. And that's why I'm such a believer in what Strawberry.me career coaching is doing. They're removing the guesswork and giving you a direct line to that same level of expertise. What I love about this service is that it gives you the clarity, strategy, and accountability that you need to turn your professional goals into reality. Whether you're trying to land a new job, advance in your current role, or transition into a completely new field, having expert guidance is a game changer. Instead of relying on guesswork or just waiting for the right time, professional coaching helps you to take control of your career trajectory. You'll identify the obstacles holding you back and develop a step-by-step plan that'll help you to move forward with total confidence. It's time to stop waiting. Go to strawberry.me/Kwame and get 50% off your first coaching session. That's strawberry.me/Kwame. It's like therapy, but for your career. Welcome to this masterclass edition of Negotiate Anything. With over 1,700 episodes featuring some of the world's brightest minds, we've carefully curated a couple of powerful conversations for you. What makes this so special is that you'll hear how different experts from different industries approach the same challenge in their own unique ways. Our goal is to give you multiple perspectives so you can build your own unique style. Success doesn't look the same for everyone, and in this masterclass, you'll see exactly why. Let's dive in.
Hello, thanks so much for having me, Kwame.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. So how would you get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So currently I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Communication at Ohio Wesleyan University in Delaware, Ohio. I also serve on the board of directors for We Rise, which is a grassroots, community-driven, anti-racist organization in the community where I live. And also in thinking about doing this interview with you, I kind of was reminded of my time as a sales and marketing rep for a medical supply company in between undergraduate and my graduate work. So I don't always think of myself sort of through this conflict or negotiation lens, but it is something that I've been doing for a long time, and now I teach it.
Fantastic. Yes. And we're super excited to chat because you mentioned something really interesting before the conversation started. Because I like to start off by just asking, hey, where's your energy going? Like, what when it relates to human interaction, what's really jazzing you up? And you said, focusing on the humanity of those we're in conflict with. And I love that. So tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah. And this is something that I've really been sort of working through and thinking through, primarily in my role as an educator, because I think that it's something that we all struggle with, right? When we're in conflict with someone, as you wrote about in your book, right? There are all these emotions that become involved. And so we sometimes forget to sort of see or think about the fact that the person that we're engaging with at the end of the day is a human, just like we are. And when the conflict topics are particularly charged or exciting in some way, right, we tend to sort of let that overshadow or kind of shade our vision on how we feel about, right, that person, which at the end of the day doesn't really get us anywhere. If we're not able to see that humanity, we're not really able to connect with that individual. And so all hopes of really resolving the conflict in any way, or at least managing it, kind of go out the door.
Yeah, you're so right. Let's get deeper into really what drives this tendency for us to dehumanize the other side. Where exactly do you think that comes from?
Well, I think at least in my research background, I would say through the lens of intercultural communication and sort of the idea of othering, right? And so we have these in groups and these out groups, and we just have this propensity as human beings to think of others as members of our out group. And so if you don't look like me, if you don't think like me, if you don't believe the things that I believe, then you must be an other, right? And so when we talk about or think about engaging in conversation with others, we tend to dehumanize them.
Absolutely. And I love the term that you use, which is propensity, because what that tells me is that this is not a choice. We're not in this conflict and I say, you know what would help me in this conflict? I want to dehumanize this person. Isn't it? It's not a conscious thing. It's just a
Yeah.
natural thing. And when you think about in-group versus out-group bias, whenever we can see similarities in other people, and we see them as part of our side or part of our tribe, then what I'm realizing more and more often is that with tribalism is nothing without having some kind of enemy. It's like, who are we against, not just what are we for? And so it's really important for us to understand that underlying psychology so we can start to work against it when it starts to come into play in our everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so much at the crux of everything, right? Is just understanding that that is the way that our brains function, because in understanding psychology, our brains function that way for a reason, right? We like to monitor our cognitive resources and make sure that we're not expending too much energy thinking about everything. And so our brains are hardwired, right, to prepare us for survival in a lot of ways. And so when we're engaging in these difficult conversations, or when we're thinking about approaching these difficult conversations, or just communicating with people, right, we have to be able to recognize, okay, wait a second, am I in a moment of survival, right? I'm not. And so I can sort of pay attention to or acknowledge the biases that I might be operating under, and taking that conscious moment to sort of reflect on how you're thinking can then reframe or sort of shape the way that you communicate going forward.
Talking about cognitive resources, I think this is something that's often overlooked because our brains are designed to save energy. What this means is that in order to not dehumanize people, or I could just say in order to humanize people in the heat of the moment, it's going to take a lot of effort. And that's hard to do, especially when you're already under a lot of cognitive load because you're having a pretty significant conversation of consequence there too. And so you're doing that. And then now you have to really, with intentionality, try to humanize the person. And then at the same time, the other person might not have heard the episode with Dr. Ashley Kennard. They might not be humanizing us. It's a lot of effort that it takes for us to galvanize those resources and overcome those barriers. So how do we do this in the moment?
That's a really great question, right? At the heart of it, though, I think it's being conscious and more aware, and so that we're able to be more intentional and thinking about how we might overcome some of these biases just simply by recognizing them. I also think it has to do with educating yourself, right? And the more that you can try to understand and learn about people and cultures and interactions, you're better prepared to sort of show up in more intentional and engaged ways.
I just realized something. Why should I be the person to humanize the other side when they're not giving me the same grace?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question, right? There are lots of ways to answer this question. I think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes, you're just not that person, right? Or that's not the moment, and you choose your piece and you can walk away from that conversation. You don't have to engage in that moment. If you realize that that person has not shown up with any sort of open-mindedness or willingness to listen and to interact in meaningful and productive ways, you walk away, right? And I think that that's perfectly fine. But aside from that, I think if you really have a lot invested in this relationship, you're really wanting to work through it, or you feel really boldly about the point that you're trying to make, I think you realize that it's a process and that it takes time. And so it might not happen right now, but what are some other things that I can do to build trust in this relationship, to connect with this individual, to demonstrate some of our similarities, right? Sometimes it's just being purposeful and thinking through, in what ways are we similar? What do we have in common? And where can we sort of see eye to eye, and then building off of that?
Oh, so much good here. And the first point that you made when you said we can choose not to engage in that moment, I think that's so powerful, but so often overlooked, because I think a lot of times we feel obligated to see the conversation through to its natural conclusion. And we have to realize that sometimes taking a break and recognizing that, hey, I'm not in a good place to have this conversation right now. I cannot galvanize the cognitive resources to do what needs to be done to negotiate and resolve conflict at a high level. So I'm just not going to do it right now. That is really, really powerful, but often overlooked. And then recognizing that you have to put your emotional desires in the moment below your long-term goals. Because you said, if you care about the relationship, and if you care about the outcome, then you should utilize these techniques. And humanization of the other side is part of that technique. Because if you're dehumanizing the other side, I don't think there's a way for you to dehumanize someone while at the same time respecting them. And so the person is going to feel disrespected. And what they're going to do throughout the entirety of the interaction is try to reclaim that respect, usually through force and aggression. And so now we have a fight, and that's not productive. And so we have to demonstrate that respect, and then they would be more likely to reciprocate in kind, and then we'll be able to move in the right direction. But I think what we have to recognize is we have to be the leaders in the interaction to get that ball of positivity moving in the right direction. And then you also said it's a process. It's going to take time, because if you've gotten to the point where you are dehumanizing the other side and seeing them as the other, like the evil person, the villain, probably you have a big conflict on your hand, and it's probably going to take more than 2 or 3 minutes to put it together. And the tip that you gave, I thought was great. Focus on those similarities. No matter who it is that you're talking to, you've got something in common with them, something. Be creative. And then you start to find those things, expand on those things. And then what you're doing is you're triggering a little bit of in-group bias. You want to take some time and demonstrate how we are actually moving in the same direction, actually working together, actually somehow on the same team. And then you start to get some of the benefits of the in-group bias, and then that out-group bias starts to go a little bit downward, which can really do wonders for the relationship. So you just dropped some gems there, and I want to make sure that the listeners caught those.
Wonderful. And I will just add too, because I think it's really important. We haven't talked much about emotion, but that is another key part of this. And to share a little anecdote, I thru hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2017 with my partner. And before we decided to take off on this journey, this 2,189.8 mile journey for 6.5 months, I said, we need a safe word essentially for our interactions. And so we collectively share a distaste for kombucha, and that was the word. And so if things started to get heated, we started to get a little, frustrated with each other, which is inevitable when you're spending all day, every single day, hiking up and down mountains together. I just sort of said we need to have a way to say stop and pause. And it meant that you got 20 minutes, right? You automatically get 20 minutes where you can't talk to me. We're not going to engage. We're not going to talk about anything, so that we can sort of process for some time before we actually have this conversation. And we used it, right? Not often, but, especially at the beginning when we were kind of figuring out our pace and our hiking style and how it would work, we fell back on that to say, you know what? I need a minute, because the things I'm going to say in this moment aren't the things that I want to say. They're not going to be productive. They're not going to be helpful.
That's a great example. And as soon as you started to talk about the trail and 6 months, the first thing that came to mind was no escape.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's smart though. That's smart, because again, it's going to happen, and you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. But once those things come out, it's out there, and
Right.
there's you feel that regret sometimes, and it's like, I can't undo that. Hopefully I can try to rebuild that relationship, but
Right.
I cannot undo the damage that was done. And just recognizing that, and a lot of times in these conversations, you're going to be successful, not so much because of the really cool, amazing things that you say, but because of the mistakes that you do not make. And now, when we were chatting, you brought up something that I thought was really great. Every interaction is an intercultural interaction. Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah. And I think before I jump into answering that, it's important to just talk about the way that we think about the word culture, because oftentimes people tend to think of what I refer to as like the big C cultures, where we think about nationalities and ethnicities and things like that. And we tend to forget what might be more like little C cultures, and the different ways in which all of the past experiences, and our knowledge and all the things that we sort of bring to the table when we interact with folks. And so if you think about culture in that way, you think about how we have all these sort of different subcultures or little C cultures that influence our everyday interactions, then you could argue that every interaction is intercultural in some way, right? We're bringing those things.
I love that. It makes so much sense. And now I want to paint this picture. Let's say we don't recognize that every interaction is an intercultural interaction. What are the risks? What are the dangers?
Well, I think that in not thinking about it in this way, we tend to get caught up in our own assumptions and our own viewpoints, and we don't look at things from other people's perspectives. And so it's often that, say we're in conflict with a friend or a roommate or a peer, we have our side of the story, right? And we have the way that we understand all of those events, whatever led to this conflict, to have gone down. And if we're not thinking about why I feel a certain type of way about why, for example, the dishes need to be cleaned every night, then I'm not considering why somebody else thinks that they don't need to be cleaned every single night or something to that effect, right? And so if we can't understand our own sort of culture and why we feel the certain way that we do about certain things, we're definitely not going to be thinking about why or how other folks feel about it. And that just leads to, miscommunication, which is at the crux of so many problems and the cause of so much conflict.
This is really good. And you're so right, because again, we have these assumptions and we just think that the world should be this way. So imagine we grow up in a family where dishes were done every night, and then we lived on our own and dishes were done every night. And now as somebody else has a different metric. And it's like, how have you lived this way? It's clear that it should be done this way, right? And it can be really I think some of my favorite conflicts to observe, not be in, are the ones where one person's idea of common sense runs counter to somebody else's idea of common sense. And then for the first time, they have to reconcile with the fact that it's just your way and my way, not right and wrong. How do we address that? I think that's fascinating, but very challenging.
Well, and I think too, it goes back to communication. And in those moments, our tendency, and maybe this goes back to those cognitive resources, but our tendency is to then make assumptions about why, right? And so we assume that, oh, well, you're just so lazy that that's why you think it's okay for them to stick around for a day or so, right? And we make these assumptions without ever giving the other person the opportunity to share their side or their feelings about it or why they believe, what it is that they believe. And so those assumptions, I mean, the adage, right? Like assumptions are dangerous. And so it's just not really a great way to manage a relationship. Thinking about it through this lens that there might just be different perspectives here or different cultures at work, then you're less likely to engage. You're more likely to assume, and that's where things start to fall apart, I think.
If you're leading a lot of meetings, or if you're in meetings back to back all day, you know how mentally demanding that can be. You're trying to stay present, you're contributing, you're thinking strategically, but part of your brain is also tracking action items, decisions, and follow-ups. That's why our team uses Granola. Granola is an AI-powered notepad built for the way real people actually meet. Here's how it works. You take rough notes like you normally would, and in the background, Granola securely transcribes the meeting, and when it ends, it turns everything into clean, structured notes that are actually useful. And what I appreciate the most is that it works through your device's audio. It integrates seamlessly into the video conferencing tools that you already use, and there's no complicated setup. It just fits into your workflow. Granola doesn't replace you in the meeting, it augments you. It lets you lean in, focus, and listen deeply while still walking away knowing exactly what was deciding, who owns what, and what comes next. Before Granola, our team would spend extra time cleaning up notes and double-checking details. Now, we leave meetings aligned and clear. It saved us time and helped us to operate at a much higher level. If meetings are eating up your day, Granola is a no-brainer. You can actually try it completely free for 3 months. Just head to granola.ai/Kwame. That's granola.ai/Kwame to get your time back. Get 3 months free at granola.ai/Kwame. As a self-employed business owner, my family depends on me. I think a lot about how I'm going to provide for them, how I'm going to build the business, and how I'm going to support Whitney and the boys. But I had a moment recently where I asked myself a harder question. If something unexpected happened to me, would my family be okay financially? And that's why I got serious about term life insurance and why I looked into Fabric by Gerber Life. Fabric by Gerber Life is term life insurance you can get done today, and it's made for busy parents, all online, on your schedule, right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes with no health exam required. If you have kids, and especially if you're young and healthy, now is the time to lock in low rates. And even if you already have life insurance through your employer, it might not be enough to fully protect your family, and it probably won't follow you if you leave your job. Fabric has flexible, high-quality policies that fit your family and your budget. We're talking $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/Kwame. That's meetfabric.com/Kwame. MEET fabric.com/Kwame. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company. Not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Right. And so Let's say we're having a conversation where we're recognizing that it's an intercultural issue, your way versus my way. It's a cultural thing. And I'm recognizing some assumptions, but the other person doesn't have that high level recognition and they just keep on thinking that they're right and they're approaching it as if they're right. What advice do you have for our listeners for how to actually handle that conversation?
Yeah. And I think that's a really great question. For me, the thing that comes to mind is this idea that we don't really talk about how we talk or talk about our communication. We don't have sort of that meta communication where we actually have a conversation about how the conversation's going. And so it's okay to sort of acknowledge in that moment that the conversation is going in a direction that's not helpful, or you feel as though the person is not willing to see the humanity or your humanity in that moment. And so thinking about ways to actually acknowledge and talk about the way that you communicate. I don't think it sounds right. People are probably thinking, what is she talking about? But I'm talking about the way that we talk, right? And we don't do that. And so if you just keep pushing forward and you never take time to acknowledge what isn't working, it's not fair. Right? It's not fair to the person that you're communicating with, because you're just mad at them for not figuring out something that's in your brain. And so if we can actually just talk about the way that we talk, I think it could be really helpful and powerful in those moments.
That is so profound. I think if we were to think about like a Hollywood script, it wouldn't flow. And I think that's why most people would be reluctant to do it, but that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. And the reason I say that is because real negotiations are kind of sloppy. Like human interactions in general are sloppy. There are a lot of times when we have these conversations and we try to go one way, the other person's going another way, and then we just pause and say, hey, hold on, this is what I'm seeing. It's almost like imagine, let's use a little sports analogy. So imagine you're watching a game, but then the players are also the commentators. So it's like they call a timeout and they're like, you see this play that's happening here? This is why this isn't working. I think it's so brilliant. And I think it takes a lot of humility to be willing to do that and just recognize, hey, the approach that I came into this conversation with, unfortunately, is not working right now. Here's what I'm seeing. Tell me what you're seeing. Let's talk through how we can continue this conversation more effectively, and then let us continue the conversation. Brilliant. I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, this is strong. This is strong. And, now that I think about it, Ashley, it's been years since we've talked about the meta negotiation, like the conversation behind the conversation that should happen, but it rarely does. So I think this is a strong way to wrap this up. But I think before you go, I want you to leave the listeners with like one last piece of advice, because we covered a lot. We talked about humanizing the other side. We talked about intercultural communications. Now we're talking about the meta conversation. So when people listen to this and they're looking for like one simple place to start, what would that place be?
I would say it's okay to mess up. I think that so often we become caught up in getting it right and doing the right thing and saying the right thing and, feeling the pressure to learn and really understand what are the best methods out there for this engagement. And messing up is human and it's going to happen. I can assure you of that. But that's where the greatest things come from too, right? Nothing good comes from comfort zones, as I've been told. And so getting out of that comfort zone and recognizing that you're going to make mistakes and it's going to be okay. But it's how you sort of come back from them and the ways in which that you learn from them, and sort of how you then apply what you learned going forward, and just being really intentional about applying, and showing up in those moments going forward.
I love it. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
That was the first part of today's masterclass. Up next, we'll hear from another expert with a different approach, giving you even more strategies to add to your toolkit. Let's keep it rolling. Cameo and Daphne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kwame, for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
It's my pleasure. So how about we get started with some brief introductions? Cameo, you can go first.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Cameo Roberson, and I am co-founder and co-chair of the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors, NAPFA, Diversity and Inclusion Initiative. I'm also an advisor consultant and financial coach of Atlas Park Consulting and Finance, where I really work with both advisors and clients in a way that positively impacts their lives. So as an advisor and a coach based in the San Francisco Bay Area, I help Gen XY women and small business owners better manage their money in smart ways, creating a stronger financial foundation. Additionally, as an operations consultant, I really help advisors with tangible ways to support their value proposition, helping them build systems, develop processes, and workflows that really support an extraordinary client experience.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us. And Daphne, what about you? Tell us about yourself.
Sure. I'm Daphne Jordan. I'm a certified financial planner, and I'm also the only wealth advisor at Pioneer Wealth Management out of the beautiful city of Austin, Texas. In my career, I enjoy helping folks reach and maintain their financial goals from a holistic standpoint. So similarly to Google Maps, I assist in helping folks see potential pitfalls and clear pathways to map out their financial life.
Perfect. Thank you both for coming. So let's start with question number 1.
Yeah. So this first question is kind of like a base type of question to serve as a foundation for the rest of our discussion today. I read an article that basically says that research shows relationships formed in neighborhoods and schools, along with the interactions and experiences that come from them, influence our hidden biases. So they can start forming in children as young as 6 years old. And it gets reinforced in adulthood in social media settings and mass media. What do you think about that, Kwame?
I'm surprised it's not earlier than that, honestly. In the webinar, I told the story of how I was working with a consultant who was helping me with my fashion because I needed some help for the TED Talk. And he said, hey, you know what? You would look great in lighter colors, like some pastels, something like a pink. I said, yeah, that's good. A lavender? Yep, sounds great. And a light yellow. And I just had a visceral response against that. I was like, no. I don't wear yellow. And then I stopped and I asked myself, I was like, why did I respond that way to the color yellow? That's weird. And then I thought back in high school, I used to wear yellow, but then it stopped. And then it hit me because I'm a graduate of The Ohio State University. And of course, I was very glad to see a lot of the webinar attendees were from OSU as well. And so for those of you that don't know, our colors are scarlet and gray, also known as red for the uninitiated. But our enemies, our rivals that's Michigan, the University of Michigan, and they are maize and blue, also known as yellow. And so when I came to OSU, I had things that were yellow in my wardrobe, but it became very clear to me very quickly that socially that was unacceptable. So at this point, it just became unconscious because I completely forgot about it. But if you look at my wardrobe, there's no yellow. And so it's little things like that can really have a significant impact. In most cases, they're very well-meaning, kind of innocuous types of interactions that led to these biases. But you can tell when it comes to the media and something that your relatives and friends might say, those little things, they have an impact on the way that we see the world. And subconsciously, we adopt those beliefs, and it has a significant impact on the way we navigate the world.
Mm-hmm. That's actually great insight and is a great leader into the next question that's come up. You know, most of the time, people aren't really explicit about their biases, and it's difficult to react to something that isn't a direct insult. Do you have any tips for responding when you feel you are the target of negative bias?
Yes. And the timing of this is perfect because I try to read a book a week. And the book that I finished last week is a book called The Coddling of the American Mind, or something to that effect. And one of the things that it talked about was the concept of microaggressions. And with microaggressions, these are things that are subtle, that are offensive to people who are in minority statuses, that might be unintentional. But here's the thing about that. We really don't know what's happening under the surface. And the reason we categorize that as a microaggression is because we are assuming that what was stated came as a result of bias. But in reality, we don't know 100%, right? And so what I suggest is if you feel like you're the target of something that is biased, what I would suggest for your own benefit is to assume the best of intentions. Because really, there's no way to do a forensic psychological analysis to truly see for sure whether it is what was said or done did come as a result of bias. And so one thing that I've started to do is give people the benefit of the doubt. And this doesn't just apply to situations of microaggressions or when you feel as though you've been the target of bias with regard to what people said or did. I included this in the book for conflict management in general, because it puts you in a better psychological state. So if I feel as though somebody did something to me that was a personal slight because of race or something else, then I feel worse about the bad thing that happened. The bad thing was already bad. And then because I take it personally, I make it even worse. So the first thing I would suggest, just to make sure that you put yourself in the best mindset for success, is to assume the best of intentions with all of these situations. And then what I would say is then ask for some clarity. But if it's something more significant that has an impact on my career in some kind of way or my reputation in some kind of way, what I would do is I would simply ask for clarification. Because when it comes to negotiation and conflict, it's an information game. There's a lot of information that we don't have in this situation. And so what I would do is start the conversation, explain the situation, and then give them the opportunity to help me to understand what happened. And that's the exact formulation of the question that I would ask. I would just say, hey, Cameo, yesterday XYZ happened, and we've been working together for a long time, and I really respect you. And so I just was wondering if you could help me to understand where that came from. And so that doesn't sound aggressive, right? And it just starts the conversation from there. And a lot of times we start too aggressively, and then we invite a defensive response, and then the conversation goes astray from there. So I think that's going to be your greatest tool, and a simple tool, just giving people the benefit of the doubt in these situations.
That is really great. It kind of makes you stop and think about what you're saying and how you're acting or reacting and responding. So then if you're on the sending end, we had one of the advisors ask, what are ways we can improve our awareness of our own biases so we don't participate in the microaggression example that you gave a few minutes ago?
I think for both parties, but especially on the party that might be accused of sending something and that could be misinterpreted, I would make sure to enter the conversations with humility. And if it's a situation where you're not entirely sure how to act or what to do or say, it is completely okay to say that. Because when you enter those situations and you say, hey, I'm new, what should I do? How should I say? What should I say? And how should I approach this situation? That shows the other party that what might come next was not malicious. And if you do make a mistake, they'll give you that grace that you want. And then also it puts you in a position to learn more about the situation. So it puts you in a position to make it less likely for you to make those mistakes in the future. I remember when I graduated from law school, I met a new mentor, and he said, well, let me tell you this. I'm older than you. I've been in the game a lot longer than you. And in the past, I have been accused of racism, and I honestly don't know why. I was trying my best, but I don't know why. So as I teach you the law, I want you to teach me how to interact better with minorities, because it's been an issue for me in the past. And now we're buddies. I mean, for the past 5 years, we hang out all the time, watch Buckeye games and everything like that. It's a really deep friendship. And I think that vulnerability that he had up front played a big role in that, because it led to the free flow of information. When you're walking on eggshells because you're constantly afraid of offending people, it really puts a damper on how close you can get to somebody. And so if you say from the beginning, listen, I might say something offensive, FYI, I didn't mean it. But if I do, can you tell me? That's a great way to start a friendship, because when those faux pas happen, and with me and my mentor, they definitely did, then you can address the situation and everybody can get on the same page quickly without that ambiguity that can sometimes cloud a relationship and make it difficult for true connection.
That's great. Sounds like, finding common ground and better understanding where the individual is coming from will help mitigate the situation so that things work out in a more positive fashion. Now, we know that sometimes there's a fine line between someone exhibiting bias and really someone trying to bait you or trying to create a debate. How can you know the difference? Are there any clues?
And when you say create a debate, do you mean that in a malicious way in order to entice you to make a mistake?
So this is someone who is maliciously trying to bait you into a situation and creating a debate. And so knowing that there's a fine line between someone exhibiting bias and someone being malicious, how can you really know the difference? And are there any clues?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think you can know the difference. And second of all, I don't think it benefits you if you know the difference, honestly. When you have these difficult conversations, there is a lot happening. So first of all, psychologically, what's happening is your brain is filled with a stress hormone called cortisol, which makes it more difficult to think clearly. You'll often interpret it as a threat, which will trigger the amygdala, the fight or flight response, which again makes it more difficult to think clearly. So cognitively, you're not going to be at your best. When you're not at your best, you don't want to add externalities that are unnecessary. And trying to decipher whether or not what's happening is as a result of bias or as a result of generalized malice really doesn't help you too much in this situation, because you're allocating precious cognitive energy to trying to make a determination that doesn't really move the needle forward. Are you ready to take your business's marketing to the next level? Meet Brevo, the all-in-one marketing and CRM platform built to help you connect with customers, boost engagement, and grow your business smarter. With Brevo, you can manage all of your customer interactions in one place, nurture leads with their built-in CRM, and reach your audience through email and SMS, and keep them coming back with powerful automations. But here's where it gets really exciting. Meet Aura, Brevo's AI assistant. Aura helps you craft smarter campaigns by suggesting personalized content, optimizing send times, and even analyzing performance data to help you improve your strategy in real time. It's like having a marketing expert on your team 24/7. And of course, Brevo offers advanced analytics, seamless integrations, and AI-driven personalization. Everything you need to craft multi-channel campaigns that hit the mark every single time. Get started for free today or use code ANYTHING50 to save 50% on starter and standard plans for the first 3 months of an annual subscription. So just head to www.brevo.com/anything and take your marketing further with Brevo and Aura. Picture this. It's late at night, you're scrolling, and you see something that you've been looking for. You click, you add it to your cart, and head to the checkout. But then it happens. You can't remember your password. You don't have your wallet nearby. And you start thinking, I'll just come back to this later. And that's when you see it. That purple Shop Pay button. One tap, done. It's one of the smoothest checkout experiences out there, and as someone who has studied decision-making for a living, I can tell you, reducing friction changes everything. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses all around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States, from brands just getting started to major household names. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand style. It's packed with AI tools that write product descriptions, create page headlines, and even enhance your product photography, helping you to move faster. You can create email and social media campaigns to reach customers wherever they're scrolling. And you can manage everything from one place, from inventory to payments to analytics, without juggling multiple platforms. See less carts go abandoned and more sales go with Shopify and their Shop Pay button. Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/Kwame. Go to shopify.com/Kwame. That's shopify.com/Kwame. In that situation, if somebody is just in general being disagreeable, I think it's good enough to just log that as this person is being disagreeable to me. Okay, now I understand where this person stands in that regard, and now I can try to make some determinations as to what my course of action is. One of the things that we are seeing throughout, and I think this is the thread that binds all of these responses together, is that when it comes to negotiations and conflicts, it's an information game. That's where it starts. We don't know everything we need to know in order to resolve the conflict effectively. And so oftentimes in these situations, we feel the need to respond by making statements that end in periods or exclamation points, when in reality, especially at the beginning of the conversation, we need more information. We should be focusing on question marks. And so at the beginning of any type of interaction, especially when there are signals of hostility, go back to that compassionate curiosity framework that I talk about in the TED Talk and the book, where you first acknowledge emotions, then get curious with compassion, and then engage in joint problem solving and use that as your foundation. And when it comes to the compassion part, that's just a trick that you use, a mental trick to slow you down and ask questions in a way that doesn't trigger an aggressive response. Because if you imagine somebody who you think is compassionate, and then you ask yourself, how would this person ask an open-ended question in this situation? Most likely, you're not going to sound like a and we've all had those situations where somebody says you're yelling, but you're not yelling. What they really mean is that your tone is off, and that can really derail a conversation. So gather information, slow down, and try not to utilize cognitive resources in a way that doesn't move the conversation forward.
Focus on the question marks. That's a good thing to remember. And I'm glad that you brought up the idea that negotiation is an information game. So how do you negotiate when you don't agree on the facts?
In most situations, there are going to be disagreements that are based upon a different understanding of facts. And the reality is that neither of us in this conversation have our own personal CSIs where we can go back and gather evidence and figure that stuff out. We are going to rely on memory. And in order to understand how bad of a situation that is, I think it's important to just kind of give a brief primer on how memory works. And so when it comes to memory, it's not like a video camera that records everything and we play it back. We remember it like that, but that's not the way it is. The way our memory works is that we create essentially bullet points that will say, kind of outline what happened in the situation. And those bullet points are going to be greatly influenced by our perceptions and our biases. Not focusing on racial biases here, just our biases towards ourselves, our self-serving bias. Everybody has that. So that's why in these situations, we typically look good in our memory. We're a little bit taller, we're a little bit fitter, and our arguments make a lot of sense when we look back and think back to how things went down. But the problem is somebody else is thinking the exact same way. So in reality, when you think back and you try to remember an argument or remember a situation, and we see things in our mind's eye and we hear things, what's really happening is that we are taking those bullet points and we're filling in the gaps with our imagination. So in reality, when we're having a heated discussion about what did or did not happen in the past, it's my imagination versus your imagination. And really, both of us are getting really upset about our imagination. So when it comes to these conversations, when there's a disagreement in the facts, what we need to realize is, first of all, what do we agree on? What are the facts that we can agree on? And usually those are things that are going to be stripped of emotions, like it was Wednesday, those type of things, just basic outlines of the facts. So let's focus on those things. Then you need to ask yourself, what facts are important in order for me to get to my destination in this conversation? And then you'll be surprised how few of those contentious points are important when it comes to our ultimate goal, because our ultimate goal isn't necessarily to be right with regard to the past. The past is done. I can't do anything about that. But what our goal is to create a future that is mutually acceptable between the parties. And so oftentimes what I suggest people do is it's a grammatical trick. You sacrifice the past in order to win the future. You change the tense of the conversation. And so I sacrifice the past by saying, you know what, Daphne, you have a really great point. I think you're probably right. So considering all of this, what can we do to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future? And then we start talking about problem solving. Now we start talking about the future. And now we can have a collaborative conversation about what we can do to co-create a future that works for both of us. Because in the past, that's going to be contentious. There we're going to be enemies. But the future, I'm not mad about the future yet. It hasn't happened. How can I be mad about it? So I might as well work with you to try to make it acceptable. So focusing on the future is the best way way to overcome those issues when you have disagreements about the past.
That's great. A lot of insight here. Now, Kwame, I'm wondering, can biases be protective, urging caution when you're in a situation where you should be careful?
Yes. And I think the origin of most of these biases are protective in nature, because we are a species that's really mindful of threats. And so we're going to be more sensitive towards threats than we are towards opportunity. And when you think about it from an evolutionary psychology perspective, it makes sense, because if I'm a hunter-gatherer on the plains and I find new berries, that's cool. That's nice. But if I miss the saber-toothed tiger behind me, that's a bad day. I'm done. so bad things can kill me a lot faster. And so we're going to be more sensitive towards the negative things. And so we create these biases, also known as, in certain situations, heuristics, which are mental shortcuts that help us to make quick determinations that protect us. And so these situations, typically behind a bias is not a situation where you're dealing with somebody who is overtly racist or sexist or something like that. No, usually it's a situation where just because of the way that the media that they've been exposed to, the people that they've been exposed to, your brain, your subconscious downloads this software that is meant to protect them. It's a very human response. And recognizing that bias comes as a result of your brain doing human things, it allows you to, it makes it a little bit easier to give people the benefit of the doubt in these situations and to treat them with a little bit of grace, because that's just what our brains do. So yes, most of the time it will be protective in nature. And so especially as minorities, it is incumbent upon us to take steps to make people feel more comfortable. And then people would say, well, Kwame, is that fair for that responsibility to be on our shoulders? And the answer is no. But the reality is, do you want to be persuasive or do you want to be right? I want to be persuasive. I want to get the things that I want in life. And having maybe the moral high ground or standing on principle and not adjusting, if that's really important to you, then don't adjust. But for me, the things that I want in life are really important. So I'm willing to make those adjustments to make people feel more comfortable, because a lot of these biases are rooted in protection. So I want people to feel safe.
And you kind of answered a question that went through my mind about, is that fair for us to have that burden?
Yeah.
And okay. Well, one advisor commented that he or she thinks that bias continues is because of marketing, meaning that we are targeting to specific subgroups of people, to women, or by race, or by age, or by region. So they think it's a self-created and self-reinforcing type of issue. Do you agree or disagree with that sentiment, and why?
I think it's a long walk, but I can agree with that, because when you think about marketing in terms of whether it's products or whatnot, you want to reach out to people's base instincts, the things that are going to be the most motivating to them. And so the tribal instinct is something that's very close to people. The in-group, out-group type of bias is going to be very close to people. That's real. And so that can cause people to further self-segregate. And so if a product is bringing people down in one direction, that might be a direction that is further away from people who are different. So yes, that isolation can lead to perpetuating biases. But when it comes to things like marketing, and I'll lump in social media is maybe one of the worst things to happen to the human brain in history. But those things aren't going to go away. That's the thing. They aren't going to go away because they're businesses. Their goal isn't to improve society. Their goal at this point, especially after they go public, is to make money. They're now beholden to the shareholder. Oh, what did you do this month to increase profits? Well, I did things to bring people closer together. Didn't make more money? Well, change your ways. Get back to the money making, right? So those things are going to be around for sure. sure. I think it's helpful to understand those things in society that help to exacerbate the problem. But at the same time, I think it's important to come to terms with the fact that a lot of those things aren't going to go away. So it's going to be important to not only raise awareness, but also make sure that we all have the necessary skills to connect, especially when it comes to connecting in person. Because when it comes to connecting online, it really taps into our tribal nature that pulls us apart.
That's great insight, when you compare to what's happening in social media and then what's happening in the real world, and how do you navigate those things in a way that makes sense. And it sounds like being aware that these things are present and then figuring out how to get from point A to point B. So I'm wondering, are there any situations where you should admit your biases? Are there any pros versus cons in those situations?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
That's a tough one, because with me and my mentor, that was one-on-one. We were creating a deep personal relationship. But if you are in the business, in the business world, and you're in front of multiple people, there are people that are really sensitive, and you might not be able to recover from that. Well, is Jim a racist? Well, he said he was a racist. How do you come back? And so I think it's really tough. So I think you need to recognize different strategies will apply to different people in different circumstances. So that's a conversation you can have with people one-on-one, where you say, listen, I'm just trying to learn more about these situations. I haven't had much exposure. And if there's ever a situation where I say something inappropriate, please let me know. And I want you to know that it's not intentional. But I think that's a good way to go about those kind of those difficult situations without saying, hey, self-identifying as somebody who has a bias, which might come off as difficult. And at the same time, not putting pressure on somebody else to kind of be the de facto ambassador for a certain group. But when it comes to group dynamics in front of multiple people, that would be too risky, I would say. I think that would be too risky. And I would just try to make sure that you make it clear that you're there to listen, you're there to learn. But strategically, I don't think it would be worth the risk to say something that could be that potentially explosive in a group environment.
Right. So it sounds like doing this one-on-one and being very sensitive to what you need to share and kind of calling out the elephant in the room, but doing it in a way where you're seeking understanding.
Exactly. And this is something I tell people to do in difficult conversations in general. So if I'm feeling emotional, or if I'm feeling hungry and I'm edgy, I'll let people know at the beginning of the conversation, and I'll tell people why. And sometimes the reason why has nothing to do with them, but I don't want them to think it does. And so because that emotional leakage comes out. So that's good to do in general, not just in these situations.
Yeah, so I guess this all boils down is to having skills to connect. That's what all of this is about. And so you've hit on some of these skills organically during our conversation. Are there other strategies that we should keep in mind?
I think it would be best not to overcomplicate it, because I think it's really easy to overcomplicate it. I've done, before I opened my firm and practiced law and served as a mediator and now as the director of the American Negotiation Institute, before all that, I did some health policy work with Ohio State. And part of that included the psychological aspects when it comes to health and implicit bias. That led me to do some implicit bias trainings with police officers and other organizations, and it's a really tough issue. And when you dig deeply into the research and the science, it can become very, very overwhelming. And you honestly, if you look hard enough, you can find bias everywhere. Everybody is biased in some way. Everybody's biased. And I think it's good to just have a simple awareness that bias exists, and bias exists in everyone. And just know that. And that's it. If you are hyper aware of it, you might become paranoid, and that might be more detrimental than positive. So really, when it comes to especially this issue when dealing with bias, the simple acronym of keep it simple is the best way to do it, because overcomplicating it can lead to bad results, because you won't be able to be as in the moment as you need to be in order to truly connect with the person in front of you.
Okay,
Great. Are there any resources individuals can look up or review to help them better understand their biases?
Yeah, I think the best resource out there is Thinking Fast and Slow. Again, the name is Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a book by Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist. I believe he's a behavioral economist, but that book is great and it is exhaustive and very, very long. Very long. If you read the first 10% of that book, you're good. That's really all you need. But that is the best synopsis of that. And even better if you're like, well, Kwame, you just recommended a 600-page book. That's not going to happen. Maybe you could just look up a lecture or something that he has done based on the book Thinking Fast and Slow. But I think that is the number one resource that you can go to when it comes to implicit bias.
Has he done a TED Talk or anything like that?
I am not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I can't speak on that. I don't know. I'm sure a lot of people have cited him in their TED Talks.
Right. This has been a phenomenal conversation. One other thing comes to mind is how early do you think we recognize that bias exists in ourselves?
This is the scary part. If you're not well versed in psychology or you don't have the opportunity to learn about implicit bias or just the way the mind works, you might never know. You might never know.
Wow.
And that's the thing, because the biases exist beneath the surface. They just influence heavily the decisions that we make. And that's the scary part about it. Because here's the thing. When it comes to the human mind, I'll just go ahead and dig into the Thinking Fast and Slow literature. There are two ways of processing, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is automatic processing, very, very fast. So try and finish this sentence. It's a tough one. Mary had a little
lamb.
Yeah, was that hard? No, that's automatic. Nope. And you probably already started thinking lamb as I started saying that. And so that's a nursery rhyme that's so ingrained deeply within our psyche that you didn't need to think deeply about it. It just happened automatically, snap of a finger. That's where bias lives. But System 2 processing is slower processing. That's where you need to actually think about something in order to answer it appropriately or interpret the situation appropriately. That's going to be where you can actually work through biases. But the thing is that most people make decisions with their emotions, and then they subsequently justify the decisions that they make with their logic. So System 1 makes the decision, and then it's System 2's job to interpret it. So think about a sloppy politician. So a sloppy politician who has all of these faux pas, and then the politician has a public relation specialist who comes in at the end and explains it away. That's how your brain works. So your System 1 is really the one making the majority of decisions, but then we think that it's logical because if asked to defend the decision we make, our brains can come up with a rational sounding explanation. So that's how you can live your life without knowing whether or not you have a bias, because your brain will always come up with an answer that sounds good to you.
That's interesting and kind of scary.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Most things in psychology are.
So Kwame, it sounds like knowing is half the battle when it comes to the biases that we have within ourselves. And those are some great tips for us to think about as, we move forward and figure out how we can be more effective in conversations with individuals.
Thank you. Yeah, knowing is half the battle. And really, in these situations, you have to fight yourself because a lot of times your quick automatic answer or your quick automatic perception is wrong. And so you recognize that feeling, come to the conclusion, and then immediately question your conclusion to see where it potentially came from and if you can justify it. If you can justify it, roll with it. If you can't, then it was probably a bias, some sort of bias that led you to that quick conclusion. But yeah, awareness is a critical element of it. Well, perfect. It was great having you both on the show. But before you go, can you tell the audience about how they can get in touch with you and some resources you have?
Yeah, absolutely. Kwame, thank you so much for having us on your podcast today. This has been phenomenal. For those of you who are interested, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and it's at Atlas Park Co. And my website is the same, atlasparkco.com.
Okay, and for those of you who are interested in knowing more on the NAPA Diversity and Inclusion Initiative side, please join in on the conversation on LinkedIn at Diversify. That's Diversify ending in an I at LinkedIn. For me personally, you can follow me at Daphne Joe on Twitter or find out more at pioneerwealth.com. Enjoy talking to you, Kwame.
My pleasure. You two have a great day, and thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations! You've just joined an elite club. By listening to a full episode, you're now officially on the Negotiate Anything team. So welcome aboard. What most team members do is they subscribe to the podcast because that allows them to automatically get the latest episodes of the show. The best things in life lie on the other side of difficult conversations. Keep learning, keep practicing, and keep getting better. Your relationships will improve, your career will soar, and you'll have the confidence you need to get the most out of these crucial conversations. Again, thank you for joining the team. We're excited to have you, and I will see you in the next episode. I'll catch you later.